Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on ransomware attacks in the supply chain, securing your data downstream. We're going to give everyone just a couple of more minutes to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. We're just going to give everyone just 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, I think we are ready to rock and roll. Just to make sure everyone can see my screen, Jay or someone from the Veriato team, can you confirm that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, awesome, perfect. Well, hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on the continuing hot topic of ransomware. We are excited to jump into this topic today, right? So supply chain risks are at the forefront of cyber threats today, and recent high-profile ransomware attacks such as the Colonial Pipeline hack, cassaya, All of these attacks only outline the significant impact that these can have on supply chains and the importance of addressing these vulnerabilities. Now, before we dig into this more, we'll do a couple of quick introductions here. So I'm Dr. Christine Swakor. I'm the moderator for today's conversation. A bit of background on me: I've been in the cybersecurity industry for about a decade. I earned a PhD in security engineering and led numerous cybersecurity functions in large companies like United Airlines before taking on my current role as the CEO of Cyber Pop-Up, which is a next generation cybersecurity services company. And joining the conversation today, we have Jay Goetze with us. Jay is the head of product and technology over at Awareness Technologies in Viriato. He has over 15 years of experience building enterprise scale SaaS businesses focused on everything from information security and compliance to third-party risk management to AI and machine learning, data-centric driven approaches to cybersecurity, and much more. And so he's bringing to the table deep expertise in developing security programs for large enterprises, as well as small and medium-sized businesses. So such a nice wealth of knowledge in the cybersecurity space and perfect perspective to hear from on this topic. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you.
Awesome. So during this session, we'll cover a lot of ground. So we'll talk about the evolution of supply chain risks and the impacts that companies are seeing. We'll take a deep dive into the cassaya breach and similar ones to understand, what sort of happened here, what we can all learn from those incidents, and how we can move forward. And finally, we'll wrap up with tips for managing supply chain risk, especially around ransomware. And then we'll do a deep dive into what this can look like in practice through Viriato's Ransom Safe, which we have Suzanne on to cover as well. Now, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to share them in the Q&A chat window. I will keep an eye out on that and try to get through as many of them as we can in the time that we have here. So to jump in with some key statistics to set the stage for this conversation. As enterprises rely more on third-party and SaaS solutions, this of course significantly can contribute to third-party related attacks. Attackers are using the supply chains as easy routes to get into organizations, to spread laterally, and to do more. And so one interesting or somewhat alarming stat right now is there's been a 43% uptick in supply chain attacks since last year. Often, these attackers are trying to target the weakest link, right, and then get to that big prize, and that's what we're seeing here. And so we know that we not only have to pay attention to our own security, but that of anyone who is connected to us. Another interesting stat here, the Identity Theft Resource Center found that supply chain attacks affected 43 million individuals. And so we've seen this on many occasions, right? The impacts that supply chain disruptions have don't just impact the actual company, right? But those downstream impacts can be felt well beyond, both on the company side as well as on the consumer side in some cases. Another one, now we all know that the larger the threat landscape and attack surfaces, the more opportunities there are for attacks. And so in this case, companies have a wide variety of options for supply chain attacks to happen, right? With the average company having over 1,000 vendors in their supplier network. So again, being concerned with the security posture of every single one of those points, because they can become a vector for attack. Some other interesting things that came out of this same report were that 77% of CISOs reported that they had limited visibility around third-party vendors. 80% of breaches were related to third-party risks, and just a lot of interesting and quite honestly concerning data points coming out from some of these assessments. And then of course, ransomware is the major topic that we're talking about today here as well, and it's a key thing that's been disrupting supply chains today. And so we're seeing this intersection of ransomware attacks and the supply chain impacts, and this is of course the concern. These types of attacks soared 150% from the previous year. Okay, so now I've shared a bit of background here. Jay, I'm looking forward to having you jump in and getting your thoughts. Where do the ransomware and supply chain risks intersect, and why should we be concerned about this?
Sure. So as we move further and further in this digital age, we are dependent on many softwares and hardwares that are supplied by third parties. So very earlier on, companies used to have their own software in-house, development in-house, but now a lot of it is moved to the cloud. You rely on third parties. In addition, you rely on third parties to manage your infrastructure, even your security. Now that's your classic third parties. And if those third parties are compromised and attacks are delivered through those third parties, so which really is your supply chain. I mean, all these vendors are part of your supply chain, your technology stack supply chain. Now, instead of what the threat actors, the bad guys are doing now, is instead of going point by point, if they attack the supply chain, they can yield a lot more fish in their nets, a lot more consumers and a lot of businesses can be affected. So supply chain is being increasingly used as means of delivering ransomware, and that's exactly where they intersect. It's more efficient for the threat actors. One compromise can lead to compromise of millions of businesses. So you can really see the impact of that.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like they're uh, catching wind of, or have been for some time, of the fact that you get the biggest bang for your buck sometimes when you take on these smaller companies or whoever might be the weakest link, right? And have that downstream impact from there. Now, these disruptions are not just about money or loss of access, right? When we talk about impact, right? The stakes are getting much higher and potentially impacting a livelihood and the quality of life. So, for example, this is pretty recent, but the FBI sent out a private industry notification to warn organizations in the food and agriculture sector, because the increased reliance on smart technologies, IoT devices, industrial control systems, and all of that really exposes the sector to different cyber attacks that can lead to the disruption of operations that can impact the entire food supply chain. And so all types of businesses in this sector, they're saying, are at risk, from farms to processors to manufacturers to markets to restaurants, when we think about those, downstream impacts as well. And so the other piece too is that, right, these ransomware attacks are often also complemented by theft of data, which people then use for extortion, which I think we'll get into a little bit further on. But I think the bottom line here is that the stakes are getting higher. All right, no industry is really exempt, no business size is exempt from these threats. And so this is a very important conversation to have, which is a good segue into the main topic that we want to cover here. And that's really this recent, this summer, the cassaya attack. And so, this is where, an Ireland-based IT solutions firm was hit with a ransomware attack with a price tag of 70 million in USD. And Cassaya's clients include everything from MSPs to enterprises of all sizes, and so there was a huge impact here. But Jay, why don't you break this down for us? Like, what happened here? Why was it so significant? What were the impacts, and what are your thoughts?
Sure. So as some of you may know, Kaseya provides software for managed service providers, the MSPs, and the MSPs in turn manage the infrastructure for multiple of their clients. So you have really the organization in the middle between the SMBs or the enterprises and the actors. So now, using a tool called Virtual System Admin (VSA) from Kaseya, I mean, if I am an MSP, I can deploy, let's say, antivirus to thousands of my clients' endpoints to protect my clients. And I'm deploying antivirus because I'm a good guy. Now, just imagine that the same tool that I'm using to deliver antivirus is now remotely controlled by the threat actors, the bad guys. And so instead of delivering antivirus, what they'll deliver is really ransomware. And that's exactly what happened. So the threat actors using Revil ransomware exploited the vulnerabilities to hack the VSA software, the virtual system admin of Kaseya. Now, once VSA was under their control, the threat actors spread the ransomware via the MSPs to their customers. So this is really a classic supply chain-based attack where the third party is used to attack their clients. So between 800 to 1,500 SMEs were affected, And the notable disruption was that of Sweden's food chain and food retail and pharmacies and ticket sales. And those were disrupted for a number of days. So this is again a classic supply chain disruption. So really, like to sum it up, Kaseya had vulnerabilities. The threat actors exploited them. They controlled this software, and then they spread ransomware to really what could have been potentially millions. The number was small, and the reason why this number was small because Kaseya was already working on that, fixing that vulnerability. So the timing of the attack could not have been worse or better. I mean, better for Kaseya because they were already fixing it, and bad for the threat actor. Uh, but that's really how what happened here. You have a third party, which is Kaseya, that is exploited, and that's used to attack uh, basically all the endpoints.
Yeah, absolutely. Using good tools to do very bad things.
Mhm.
No, I think it's a good point that you bring up around how the impact could have been much bigger had they not have already been sort of taking steps to close the vulnerability. Because I think it just speaks to the fact that although it's an unfortunate situation all around, right? Because there was some impact, addressing those vulnerabilities as quickly and as early as possible can definitely make a world of difference.
Yeah, and there's one actually interesting point is on the timing of the attack. Was the communication between the Dutch company that found the vulnerabilities and Kaseya, was that intercepted? And from that they found the vulnerabilities, and then they attacked in such a swift manner.
Mm.
So that again, that also means that you need to really button down your Office 365. Sometimes people don't think, hey, there's no data there. But really, if you're exchanging sensitive emails that are describing vulnerabilities, that is yet another supply chain, and in this case, supply chain is the Office 365 being the third party.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point there. Now it seems like these attacks happen every day now, right? We've seen quite a few significant ones, from Kaseya to, I mentioned before, Colonial Pipeline and much more. I'm curious from your point of view, like what were the similarities between what you described with Kaseya just now and what happened with the infamous SolarWinds attack? I know that was a huge topic for quite some time and still continues to be. And so what would you say are the similarities and differences between those two scenarios?
Sure, yeah, we cannot talk about supply chain attack and not discuss SolarWinds. So here what we saw was a compromised software was used to deliver ransomware. So that's Kaseya we're talking about. So Kaseya is compromised, that's delivering ransomware. Well, in case of, and so if you look at threat actors, they have to go and exploit the vulnerabilities of Kaseya in every MSP. But what if the vulnerability and the malware is already embedded in the software? So instead of going and attacking every MSP, what if I just have something in the software itself and starts attacking automatically? So really, I don't really have to do anything. I can attack one vendor, and then that can translate into millions of vendors without any heavy lifting. And that's exactly what happened in SolarWinds. SolarWinds is used to manage and monitor infrastructure globally. It has access to most privileged parts of the network. And what really happened there was the SolarWinds itself had a malware embedded in it that would automatically, whoever installed it, would automatically have a compromised network. That one was an extremely sophisticated attack. It was one of the first of its kind. It was primarily not used for ransomware, but it was used to spy on US government agencies and other critical companies to us, like Microsoft and others. So I would consider that SolarWinds was a more sophisticated supply chain attack, and Kaseya, of course, had an equally large impact, but was a little less sophisticated in terms of how it was being exploited.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll continue to see the level of sophistication with these attacks just continue to rise and, get even more alarming. So yeah, great points there. Now we've talked a lot about you know, what has happened and how some of these things happen, but can you summarize like what would be the biggest lessons learned from these attacks?
So if you just take a look at if solarwinds or cassaya, you can see that the level of sophistication of these ransomware and the threat actors, it keeps on increasing. If you go into the details, it's like it's a big story on how SolarWind what happened. So you see that the sophistication is improving. The operational efficiencies of the threat attackers are improving. So they're treating it as a business, and they will attack with speed. They'll attack with precision, and especially in case of like Kaseya, businesses will not be able to prevent those attacks because the very software that is used to protect and detect malware is really attacking them. So what in turns really happens is that, okay, now what we as a business have to do is we need to take all the preventive measures to detect and protect against ransomware attacks. We have to assume that they're going to happen, at least the first time. And then for that, we need to be prepared.
Yeah, good point. And I think because that's probably one of the main questions here, right? It's like, how can you prevent these things? And the answer really is, yeah, there are some controls that you can put in place to reduce the likelihood and so on. But the bigger thing is to just be prepared because we can't control, you know, every single element, right? And so it's like to be prepared so that if or when something like this does happen, you have some level of protection. And so even leading into the next question here, again, even if we can't prevent, like what are some things that people can do to at least, you know, whether it's limit the impacts or limit the likelihood, like what are your thoughts there?
Sure. So we're talking about supply chain attacks. So which really means, you know, your third parties that are supplying you with the necessary software and the hardware. So what that brings to the bear is that we need to have a strong third party risk assessment program to ensure that all the vendors have adequate controls. So if it's a software supplier, then you got to ensure that they have the right cloud control if they are in the cloud. And that's about like 170 odd controls that need to be implemented, and they have implemented it. That the vendor follows a secure SDLC process, the applications are pen tested, and there are multiple other controls. Now, but if you're a small and a medium-sized company, you cannot really afford to do that level of due diligence. And in that case, you may need to depend on the security certification of the vendors. But managing the third-party risk is pretty critical. Now, in addition, what you can do is you got to make sure that you have comprehensive endpoint security. So if there is any compromise or a malware has landed, it is already taken care of by things like antivirus and many other solutions that are out there. Another solution that you can look at also is the user behavior analytics that can detect an anomalous behavior. So for instance, if a malware does land and starts accessing network areas that were never accessed before, that's an anomalous behavior. And you can have software on your device to track that. The software may start working with files that it had never worked before. That should be tracked. And again, that should be alerted. And again, a pretty cheap and an easy control is like multi-factor authentication and alerts on changes to the key areas of the system. So the threat actors, what they typically do is that they stop a lot of these controls before they launch the attack. But if you have alerts that okay, saying that some of these controls are stopped, you can really take preventive action or action at the right point in time. So those are really some of the controls that you can take to make sure that you prevent a ransomware attack happening, or even if it happens, you detect it just in time.
Yeah, good point. I think another topic that isn't talked about enough, and you mentioned this around sort of the user behavior analytics and the people side of things. I feel like that's such an important piece to this because I think the behavior and the user activity can tell you a lot, right? And I feel like the other element is from just a training and awareness standpoint. And I have to say this because I'm obsessed with training and awareness. It's so much fun to me. But I think that you can go such a long way in helping, prevent or mitigate some of these attacks by really training people on the very basics of what you shouldn't do, right? From clicking on phishing emails to not sharing your credentials, to not falling into the trap of being recruited by malicious people who are looking to recruit insiders. That's actually another interesting angle. I was reading an article the other day about a group that was essentially reaching out to employees in organizations and asking them to help deploy ransomware in those companies, right? And so it's like you never know if whether it's someone who is disgruntled or someone who might be facing financial problems or whatever the case may be, who is on the inside and might be recruited to help carry out some of those attacks. And that's a trend that we continue to see grow. And so I think that one of the best ways to be able to discover and manage that, right, is to be able to, whether somebody has been compromised or not, look at their behavior and, to your point, see what's anomalous and see what's normal and try to get some type of understanding of who you can trust in your organization.
Sure. And with the rise of the hybrid work environment, like earlier on, companies used to manage that on the network. So you had pretty much all people coming into a single network and data getting channeled through very specific network points. And then companies would monitor those network points for anomalous behavior. But now with work from home, there's the network is really sort of a hybrid network, your home network, and you need tools that can scale and that can manage a hybrid work environment and still track that anomalous user behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we've talked a little bit about how to prevent and try to mitigate some of this, but when it comes to actual response, because again, some of these things might be inevitable, or in some case you just have to be prepared, right? And so, what are your tips for responding to these ransomware attacks against supply chains?
So in terms of response, right, let's suppose and there are multiple best practices that you can follow in terms of, when you attack. And one of the basic thing uh, is how you process. Like you got a ransomware attack, it's quite likely you don't know the extent to which your systems are compromised. So one thing that I tell is that any communications that needs to be happening off the network. So there should be a channel between key people which are not on your corporate networks. It could be just like direct your phone-to-phone conversations and so on. So just bringing back the cassaya attack and the timing of that, it could very well have been that their communication was compromised. So if you are in an attack mode, just make sure that the channels of communications between the key people who are responding to the attack are secure, are 100% secure, and that means could be off your corporate network. So that's one thing that happens that you have to do when you are in a ransomware attack. Now, in addition to respond to that, you need to just make sure some of the controls that are in place, these are fundamental controls, which is, you need to have strong backup strategy. We're talking about ransomware is happening and not if, but when, and you need to have backups. Now the backups, quite a few times people make the mistake that the backups are on the same network or accessible areas of the network that are compromised, leading to the backups themselves being encrypted. So you got to make sure that the backups are off the network and not accessible to the processes that are running the ransomware. Again, early detection is key, and you could use multiple controls for that. It could be just we talked before, the anomalous behavior. Suddenly you start seeing a spike in a file activity. That's an indicator that something is happening. There are some critical processes that should never be stopped, but they have stopped. Then you should get an alert that, hey, this particular critical control has stopped, and you need to act on that. So that would be an early detection and a real-time response. Then again, having a good business continuity planning program. And that program needs to be tested regularly, because I've seen quite a few times, like simple critical, you got a very elaborate BCP program, and the first step is call so and so person, but that person has left or he has a new phone number, and the whole process is broken now. So testing of the BCP at regular intervals is also pretty critical in terms of having to make sure that you are ready to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had a good question come in. And by the way, a quick note on that, for anyone listening, if you have questions, please, again, feel free to pop them in the Q&A as they come up. But one question here is for a company that may have, limited resources for the rest of the year, but really wants to do something about to protect themselves from these threats. Is there, one of these recommendations that's kind of the most important? What might give the biggest bang for your buck, or how do you begin to prioritize and create that roadmap for rolling some of this stuff out?
Yeah, so you can take steps at various levels. So you got to take a look at the maturity of your program in-house. So suppose it can start off if let's assume that you are an small and medium-sized business with a limited budget. If you take a look at the risk assessment, and you can see, okay, it all starts for SMBs. It can start with a phishing attack. So controls to prevent phishing attack are very simple. And Christine, you talked about that, and that is training and education. Hey, if you see an email that you're not expecting and asking you to click on certain links, don't click on it, because that's how the malware gets introduced. So that would be your first almost free control, that is training. So you can start off with that. Now assume that your employees are overworked, as we all are, and in a moment they click on a link. Then you need to have, and the malware gets downloaded. So then you need to have basic controls like antivirus. That those are installed on the endpoints and on your servers to make sure that those attacks or the malware does not work as expected or does not propagate across the network. So those are the two really basic level of controls you need to have. Then on the other levels of sophistication, you can have something like Ransom Safe that we will demo today that would help you with the detection and recovery, more importantly, the recovery should a ransomware attack happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good segue into our last question here before we jump into a quick walkthrough of Ransom Safe. So for companies large and small who are looking to defend against these attacks through technology, what are some key solution features and things like that that matter?
Sure. So, hey, one of the things is it should be, let's start from the basics. It should be easy to implement. Like sometimes we see sophisticated solutions like DLP. They are data loss protection controls. They are a big project by themselves, needs a big infrastructure, and so on, brings in extra amount of cost. So any solution that you take from a non-technical perspective should be very easy to implement. Then it should take care of, it should control against all the vulnerabilities that we talked about, which is that it should detect pretty early as soon as the attack happens. And that could mean that it looks at certain patterns, that the solution is knowledgeable of the latest patterns. So when ransomware attacks, they leave a certain trace and the file names are named in a specific way. The solutions themselves have the malware has very specific signatures. So the solution that you deploy to protect against ransomware should be able to detect those kinds of up-to-date signatures. Then it should be able to intercept once it detects that there is a possible ransom attack happening on the machine, then it should be able to intercept before the files are getting encrypted. And it should, regardless, create a backup of the file in a safe place that's off the network so that those files are protected just in time, and they can be recovered very easily. And then again, areas of infection, which is like it could be a desktop or it could be a file server, those would need to be blocked off so that the malware doesn't propagate. So in case of cassaya, what they had done was they had shut down all the servers that had that have the malware in it. So those are the capabilities that if you look at a software that's going to be used against ransomware, those are the capabilities that you need.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much for all of the wonderful insight. I think that is such a good segue into actually looking at what this can look like in Ransom Safe and in practice. Ransom Safe is a comprehensive solution that I think can help address a lot of the challenges that we've discussed so far. And so to get into that walkthrough, we're going to welcome Suzanne to the stage. And Suzanne, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, awesome. I'll just, continue to click through. Just let me know when to keep
Yes.
moving.
Yeah, you can. So the next couple of slides will just go in together. Yes, perfect. So thank you very much, both Christine and Jay. That's a really good, important piece of what Jay just mentioned is you need to prepare. Today, you might have AV on every single machine. You might be looking at malware, but that's never just enough just to be warned about something and detect it. You also have to be able to lock down that machine. Once that, because otherwise you'll just keep infecting the servers or other servers. So it's important to be able to have a way to detect and be alerted that something is occurring. So some of the things that we'll be discussing as part of the solution is how does that happen with the Ransom Safe solution that we'll be discussing. And the backup utilities that you have, you might say, this is great, this is sufficient, but then you have to find them. Then you have to figure out which version you need, which files are being encrypted. The whole idea of having to pay a ransom for files that are yours, it can be resolved by putting in place a solution that can restore all your files. So a lot of these antivirus will just make educated guess. They will just say, well, this might be a malware. So we're really trying to get you to that point where if a malware that is a ransomware has infiltrated your files, you can restore them quickly. So therefore, part of the solution is looking at a mechanism to take you to that point. Next slide, thank you. So some of the mechanisms that we need to look at is the solution that we have is called Ransom Safe. So it has the name Ransom Safe with the word safe at the end because that is exactly what its purpose is. It's to really take hold of the file that you have saved before the event occurred. So the whole process for us is very simple. So I'm going to probably just spend about 8 to 10 minutes on the solution, but I'll tell you, if you have installed it within this 8 minutes, you'd already be protected. And so it's important to know how quickly this can be installed. One of the things that occurs is the small business seem to be targeted more often. Like every day I'll see a security announcement or I'll see a security email that says ransomware attack, had to pay $30,000 or had to pay $10 million. Depending on the size of your company, they will go after you and they know who's going to pay and they know who's not going to pay. Even those large organizations who spend millions in security have holes when it comes to protecting for ransomware. So the software installs literally in less than 10 minutes. We will detect and alert the operator that the software has detected a malware or a ransomware. We'll protect all your data. So we're protecting all the files that have been attacked or all the files that have been encrypted. We'll lock down the end user so that they don't continue to proliferate the ransomware. And then because we have the safe, we'll back up and save multiple versions if you choose to, but we can save the version just before the moment in time where it occurred. So you never have to pay a ransom. Today, many companies will say, oh, I've got the backup. I do my backups every day or every night. But you're still got that window of time where the data might have been changed in the middle, and all the work that your employees have done is now gone. When this occurs, what do? You pull up a ransom person who might have to start negotiating with the software company who created the ransomware in order to get you the decryption key. Well, in this case, they don't. Unfortunately, in their case, they're not going to have to do a lot of work. They're going to sit down, have a cup of coffee. But your IT team, they're going to have to jump and get on the cleanup of the endpoint, make sure that that user doesn't use their software, and make sure that everything is ready and that the files are restored. You can even give the end user the ability to access their own files to restore which files they want. Recovery is literally in minutes. And of course, yes, downtime is there is no downtime. It's not extensive, and in the end, it's not expensive anymore. So let's talk about what's the technology, what do we do, how do we make this so simple? And the solution just literally just works. So the first thing it has about 3 or 4 things that it takes into consideration. So file screening, what's file screening? You have the signature files. So signature files are known ransomware signatures. Every day we'll update this database of signature files. So this way we'll know if a ransomware is attacked in a file that's known, and then we'll alert. If that first defense doesn't work, the next defense is called the honeypot defense, or the deception method. And honeypots are files that we actually put at various locations on the drive for the server. So this way, every ransomware has a pattern, and their pattern might be to start encrypting at the beginning of a drive or encrypting from the middle to the back of the drive. So with the honeypots deception method, we put honeypot files at various strategic locations. So this way, as the ransomware infiltrates, we'll pick it up. And we'll do the exact same thing. We'll alert the operator, we'll lock down the user, and then the whole process starts again. The fail-safe part, that's where that file that I was saying, the fail-safe is we'll keep a copy of that file before anything is changed, renamed, deleted, any of those actions that require a Microsoft interaction to a file. And then, of course, the lockdown takes place. So this way you're protected. The whole problem of ransomware is that it's really malicious. It just happens when it happens, and there's really nothing you can do. Recovering today takes probably on average, 30 hours to 3 days. It really depends how organized you are with your backups. So our solution, and we really want to get you to that point where you have the servers protected or any device you want to protect with ransomware. When it comes to seeing the software or seeing a demo of it, please absolutely reach out to us. We can give you a demo of how the solution works. We can install it. You can install it. Our trial version runs for 15 days. You can easily install it as well. What are the customers saying? Well, the customers, what they're saying is the biggest thing they found is the quick install. It's one of the biggest things because they can immediately be protected. Next slide, and I think that's where, if there's any questions, I do want to encourage you to send an email in. We will go through a demo with you. We'll show you how it works, and don't hesitate to, we have a document that helps you do the evaluation document as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And again, opening it up to questions. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to add those in. One question, real quick for you, Suzanne. Of course, don't have to say any specific names or anything like that. I know you have the customer reviews that we just showed, but any specific like major success stories or illustrations of, potentially what this, what a customer who has found value in this would have looked like without Ransom Safe versus how quickly they were able to respond or what they were able to do with the solution.
Yes, absolutely. My main role here at Awareness Veriato is to work with partners, and one of the things that our partners do, and earlier Jay mentioned about MSPs, and a lot of our MSPs are on the ball, meaning they're offering this to their customers, they're offering this as a service, and a lot of them use it to prepare ahead of time of a malware detection. And they've so far not had any. So what they have to say is that before they didn't feel safe because they didn't know if a ransomware was going to randomly show up. And now they deploy it to all their customers like there's no question. They just put it on their servers, the multiple servers. File servers are the backbone of all your data. This is all your confidential information, your research documents, your reports, your customer database. All these things are extremely important. So that was one of the big thing was they now feel safe.
Yeah, awesome. Love it. Okay, I don't see any additional questions coming in at this point. Suzanne, any final thoughts you want to add before I hand over to Jay for closing thoughts also?
No, I don't have any particular thing, but I just want to add that, this is for, we position it for servers, but you can easily use it on endpoints from a desktop point of view if you choose to. The honeypot files are something that we choose, but you can put them wherever you want. The file screening, we have the database, but you can also identify certain other files to exclude. So a lot of it is very customizable for that. And I encourage you to reach out so we can take care of this for you.
Awesome. Thank you. Sounds super, super flexible. Jay, from you, any closing or final thoughts you want to add before I wrap up?
Sure. So we are living in an age where the tools that are being used or should be used to protect us are used to attack us. So now you just understand the gravity of the situation. So absolutely, we need to be prepared for such attacks. Simple controls and some solutions like Ransom Safe should be deployed and make sure that your data is safe and your business is safe.
Awesome. Great closing thoughts. Well, thank you so much to Jay and Suzanne for sharing all of the wonderful insight, both on the trends and the evolution of supply chain risk and the impacts of these ransomware attacks and lessons learned, as well as the overview of Ransom Safe. This has been a great discussion. Thank you to all of our attendees for spending this time with us. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to reach out to Veriato for an in-depth demo of Ransom Safe at sales@veriato.com. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your week and be sure to stay safe and secure out there.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Christine.